guys, we're here with Undivided with Brandy. Let's go. Let's get it on.
Right now, Washington State has the third highest gas prices in the nation, just behind California and Hawaii. But we are now more than a full dollar ahead of the national average. More than a full dollar ahead of the national average, and we're only going to see them continue to go up. And in fact, given how close we are to California and Hawaii, I wouldn't be surprised if we have a repeat of last summer when, for the first time in history, we had the highest gas prices in the nation for a short period of time. So you guys know by now, I mean, you're used to having some of the highest gas prices in the nation, only getting worse because of the increased gas tax, and then, of course, because of the Climate Commitment Act, which voters were duped into not repealing last year. And the Climate Commitment Act was designed to increase gas prices. Governor Inslee lied about it. He said it wouldn't increase gas prices, despite the fact his own staff in 2014 gave a presentation to the legislature explaining that it would increase gas prices, but he has no integrity. And so he lied to people, and a lot of people just bought it. But the idea behind the Climate Commitment Act is that you have these climate carbon credits that go up for auction that polluters need to buy, basically, to be able to continue to pollute. And the longer the CCA is in effect, the fewer carbon credits there are available for auction. So the price of them skyrockets, and then what happens? They pass that along to you at the gas pump, and that's why you're paying so much money at the pump. Our friend Todd Myers with the Washington Policy Center did another one of his great articles where he goes in depth on all of these things. And I think one of the most infuriating aspects of what we're about to go through with you is that, look, if the CCA was making a substantial impact on the climate, if it was substantially reducing carbon emissions, and this was revolutionary, then maybe some people could find it in their hearts to justify it. You know, if they came out and said, hey, gas prices are going to go up, but like, we're going to save the planet and we're going to show you the results, and here are the results, and it's just exceptional, then maybe you could justify it. And I think a lot of Washington voters would be fine with it, frankly, who prioritize environmental issues, tend to be a little bit wealthier, so maybe could tolerate paying a little bit more money for gas, or drive a Tesla and don't pay any money for gas, whatever it is. But the reality is the bulk of the money brought in so far via the climate commitment grift is just going to grow the size of government, is doing absolutely nothing to help the planet, reduce carbon emissions, improve the environment. So Todd goes into all of this in great detail for the Washington Policy Center. So first, it's important to know that the CCA has brought in nearly $4 billion for the state of Washington through these auctions, which again are offset. They just pass the cost along to you at the gas pump. So that's since the beginning of 2023. The $4 billion goes to fund a range of, environmental initiatives, from public transit, electric ferries, CO2 reduction projects, climate mitigation, environmental restoration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, a big bulk of it, when you look at the numbers, just goes to bloated government. It says a close look at how the tax revenue is being spent in the new 2025-2027 operating budget shows that, contrary to rhetoric, much of the money ends up in state agencies to hire more government employees, pay for studies, and fund planning bureaucracy. In fact, more than 70%, Todd writes, of CO2 tax revenue in the operating budget is going to expand government or fund planning bureaucracy rather than projects that yield tangible environmental benefits. For example, the second largest expenditure from the CCA money in the 2025-2027 operating budget is $22.5 million that goes to fund local governments planning for climate change. What the hell does that even mean? And why are you planning for climate change? I thought we're going to save the planet from climate change through the CCA, so you shouldn't have to plan for it, right? In total, he says, there's about $25 million dedicated to government oversight of, quote, environmental justice and support for disadvantaged groups. Virtually all of that funding is for government staff, planning, and studies, with little going to projects that improve living circumstances. So $25 million for environmental justice, so you can hire government employees so they can basically talk about environmental justice. And that's why you have to pay so much money at the gas pump. It's not to improve the environment. It's not to bring down carbon pollution.
To talk about it.
It's so the state of Washington can feel good about itself, hire a bunch of workers to get in a room, sit around and talk about environmental justice and how we should help, disadvantaged communities who might live in busy areas along busy roadways and in big industrial areas where they're more likely to be exposed to pollution. We should help them. We're probably not going to, but we should. Let's talk about how they're disadvantaged, but not actually help them out. It's crazy stuff. He says there's also $300,000 to, quote, address the disproportionate rates of asthma among children who reside within 10 miles of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. He says that might be worthwhile, but it is just 0.17% of the total spending. It is one of the very few expenditures that actually directly targets environmental health and well-being. And you'll also remember, really quick note on that, what were all the commercials about during the election when the state was trying to keep the CCA and there was the initiative to repeal it? They went with these sad commercials. Little children with asthma, they can't breathe. And if you repeal the Climate Commitment Act, these children with asthma will die. And then they're spending, you find out, 0.17% to try to help kids with asthma, but specifically only kids who live within 10 miles of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. But that was one of their key talking points to try to get you to keep the CCA. Good God. It says there's also about $1.3 million to install EV charging stations and $3 million for urban forestry. There is $4 million for a workplace health and safety program for workers who are affected by climate impacts. About 18% of CCA tax revenue goes to government services, including funding to reduce the impact of the CO2 taxes on energy bills by providing utility bill assistance. Let that sink in for a second. So the CCA increases energy prices. Increases gas prices, energy prices, as a result, food prices as well, right? So then they take 18% of the $4 billion and they use that to offset the increased costs that they caused with the CCA. So isn't that just a push? But they only give those, you don't give them to everybody. So if you're a middle-class person and your energy rates go up, you're not going to get any money back. You're going to have to pay these higher rates. And they're going to take that money and then they're going to give it to other people who they deem like disadvantaged enough, right? So they create this big government bureaucracy to take money from you in the form of like higher energy prices. And then they're like, oh, and we'll spend part of it helping offset higher energy prices for some people. Maybe you shouldn't have pushed up energy prices in the first place. It's absolutely insane. So Todd, which I think is great, he's offering some solutions here. What do we do about this? Because is the CCA really going to go away? There was, I think, our best chance to repeal the CCA was in November with the initiative to repeal the Climate Commitment Act. $43 million, I think, was spent to defeat that initiative, which how do you even, they put so many lies on TV. How do you even start to push back against that? So I think Todd's of the mindset, and I've talked to him about this before, that, if the CCA is here to stay, how do we improve it? How do we stop some of the wasteful spending or actually make it a little more functional? So he said, one, Governor Ferguson should delay some of the funding for projects that are unlikely to yield climate and environmental benefits, like the $22.5 million for local climate planning, $10 million for grant writers, $4 million to provide guidance and input, $1 million for an environmental justice toolkit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he said that should be the baseline, is like, hey, this is supposed to help the environment. Let's delay or get rid of some of the funding that's not actually going to help anything except grow the size of government. He said the legislature should cancel funding to study or plan for climate impacts and either transfer that money to real world projects or cut the funding altogether. He says, 3, funding should be tied to objective metrics of environmental outcomes. None of the current expenditures, even those that are worthwhile, like forest fuel reduction, have results-driven metrics. And this is very, very common for government. We see this a lot in the homeless industrial complex, which we're going to talk about today, is they put millions of dollars towards something, and then the people who were given that money to spend don't have to prove that it actually had the desired result, which is just crazy. And then he says, 4, Spending designed to reduce CO2 emissions should be cost competitive with the private market. Currently, even the best expenditures are extremely expensive compared to available alternatives. Projects that are not should be eliminated and directed to private sector alternatives. So if the government's trying to do something and they can't do it for the same price that the private sector is doing it, like, we really should rethink whether the government needs to be in the business of trying to make a difference in that way or redirect the money to something else. So that's common sense. Of course, Governor Ferguson doesn't have any common sense. And when it comes to the climate grift, Democrats, they don't care about solutions. They don't care if it's actually having a positive impact on the environment. This is all about money, 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 money. $4 billion since just 2023. Although we still have a budget deficit. So this is a new tax, brought $4 billion extra into our coffers. You put that on top of the tax against rich people, capital gains tax, and so many of the other taxes that went into effect. We should be overrunneth with money. We should have more money than we know what to do with. But no, they get all this money and then they piss it away on dumb stuff that doesn't mean anything and just to grow the size of government. And then we end up still with a $14 billion budget deficit. It's truly insane. It's the definition of insanity. So while you're standing at the gas pump, gassing up with the third highest gas prices in the nation this weekend, just shout out, thank you, Jay Inslee. Thank you, Climate Commitment Act. Thank you, Bob Ferguson. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys, go follow.